negotiate among ourselves. I remember President Ramaphosa saying at the end of his speech, he said I was correct about the submission of business. A business indeed had made a submission, but I was wrong in one respect, which was that the business plan was not 132 pages, but was 1,000 pages. One of the striking things about the business proposal is that they say, this is what we propose in detail should happen to the South African economy over a 3-year period. At the end of that, we look at what has happened and then do another 3-year program. And they said the program we're proposing over a 3-year period would cost 3.2 trillion rand. 3.2 trillion. And they said, the private sector, we commit ourselves to invest 1 trillion rand over that 3-year period. And the public sector would have to find the other 2.2 trillion. So I said, this is 2020. The very, very first time that the private sector in this country had ever made such a commitment since 1994. It was the very, very first time in 2020 that the private sector would say we commit ourselves to invest in the South African economy. So I was saying that what the government should do is really to put that commitment in the pocket and insist and do whatever is necessary to make sure that it actually happens. That process, as I think everybody knows, disappeared somewhere. It vanished. No social compact. And I think as a country we lost this commitment of this huge investment by the private sector in the economy. I'm raising that, Francois, to say, I think that's where we need to go back to. I think the GNU needs to say, there's that process to try and elaborate a social compact, which for some reason got abandoned somewhere, and yet a lot of preparatory work had been done. Why don't we go back to that in order to give substance to the MTDP, to the Medium-Term Development Plan, substance which does not exist in the current plan? That's where I would go. Because indeed, to discuss this other matter that we're raising, about the budget and VAT and all of that, it's clear that in terms of the state revenues, the fiscal matters, the generation of the revenues that the state needs to impact on development and other things, we are not going to be able to solve this problem in the absence of in the presence of a stagnant economy. Doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter whether we say now, do we raise VAT or do we raise income tax or whatever you want to do. You're going to run into problems in a situation where the economy is stagnant. The additional resources that the state needs must come from a larger economy. Hence the critical importance of ensuring that we don't have wish lists which we call development plans, but actual plans. Actual plan which says in a year's time we want to be from here to there. And part of what that business plan did, it said, within this next 3 years, if we do the following things, we'll invest $1 trillion. Government, you invest the rest. And at the end of the 3 years, we should have created so many new jobs. We will have expanded the money going to the fiscals by so much. Things that are measurable. With commitments that you are business, you are government, you are trade union, or whatever, with commitments that can be met. I'm saying that I think that's where we need to go back to that. The medium-term development plan is not going to help us. Now, whether the government of national unity thinks the way I think, I don't know. But I'm saying as a country, we need to get back to a situation where we do actual planning about the economic future. And not depend on visions, which we think will implement themselves. Visions don't. They are necessary, but they don't implement themselves. The government of national unity, of course, has got to sort itself out. The government, I see sometimes that some of the ministers, one of them was debating about a bill that was in Parliament, and he wanted to amend it. I was saying to myself that what he doesn't understand, that particular minister, was that every single bill that comes out of government to Parliament, it comes from the cabinet. It doesn't come from a minister. It might be a minister who goes to present it there, but it's a policy decision of the cabinet. So you can't stand up as a minister and say, no, I want to change it. You can't. But I'm just saying that maybe it's people who are new to government and therefore didn't know quite what to do. The issues that were raised at the beginning about the US, China, AGOA, risks related to China, preference, is it trade or diplomacy, whatever. I think as a country, we must, as a matter of policy, say that we are not looking for enemies. We must conduct a foreign policy which says we want friendly and mutually beneficial cooperation with everybody in the world. And that even if we reach a bilateral agreement with country A, we don't reach that agreement as a way of opposing another country. Yeah. So the idea that you've got to choose this one rather than that one, we can't accept that. I'm saying as a government, as a country, we need to make sure that we try and build good relations with the US, good relations with China, and good relations with everybody. That's how we should come at it. And the notion that you must have better relations with the one with whom you have more trade than the one with whom you don't, I think is wrong. We want good relations with all of them, with China, with the US. There are problems, of course, as we know now, between the relations between South Africa and the United States currently. Personally, it's a matter that worries me. Because as a country, we don't need enemies. 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 We don't need ene We've got too many problems for us to be nurturing enemies of any kind. As all of us know, President Trump is serving his second term as President of the United States. So as a country, we've actually got experience of our relationship with President Trump from the first term. And for 4 years, during that first term, we actually had very good relations with the Trump administration. The ambassador at the time, those of us who are old enough, like Mbuyise Ndlozi, will remember her. It was Ambassador Lana Marks, a lady. One of the things about her was that she was born in East London and migrated to the United States, was an American citizen. But South Africa remained in her heart. So President Trump chose her as his ambassador to South Africa. And indeed, she came, and I get a message that she'd like to see me, so I saw her. Before she had presented her credentials. And she says, President, the reason I wanted to see is to introduce myself to you and to say to you that my instructions from the US are that in terms of everything I do here in order to improve relations between the United States and South Africa, I must seek your opinion. So I said to her, but I'm a retiree. She said, it doesn't matter, but that's my instruction. And indeed, we worked very well with her. I'm telling you this story, colleagues, in order to say, therefore, the current relations come as a surprise to me. Because you had the President Trump of that first term. And South Africa had very good relations with that administration. I'm not quite sure what has happened now. In particular because, now if I can put on an older cap. As the ANC, we have a long history of interacting with the Republican Party in the United States. They were very, very much involved, the Republican Party, in the struggle against apartheid. You'd remember that, I think it was in 1986, that the US Congress approved what they called the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act, which was vetoed by President Reagan, Republican President Reagan. Vetoed that act. Now, it is possible, according to the US Constitution, it's possible to override the veto of the president by Congress taking a decision with particular majorities. I think particularly the Senate. And the struggle to override the veto by President Reagan was led by Republican presidents. I even remember the names. Senator Lugar, Senator Nancy, Willie, remember her? Castlebaum. Those two Republican senators organized in Senate to Republican senators to override a decision by a Republican president in favor of sanctions against apartheid South Africa. I'm giving that as an example, colleagues, who say that this is part of the history of our relationship with the Republican Party. And therefore, when you have a situation as we have now, with all these tensions, my view is that we need to have a serious, very serious engagement with President Trump and the administration to discuss and say, what's the problem? Because the problem is new. In terms of the history of our relationship with the Republican Party, which goes over many decades, we've never faced a situation of this kind. What's the problem? We need to sit down and sort this thing out. I'm not talking about this full story about persecution of Afrikaners and all that. More substantial. What's the thing that has happened which results in this tension, which South Africa does not need between ourselves and the US? I think that's what needs to happen. It is true that in the context of which we might even save AGOA, because indeed, as you said Sandy, there are many of our products into the United States which go in duty-free because of AGOA, which might not get access in those markets if that AGOA is removed, resulting in job losses here, and so we don't want that. So I think we need that very serious engagement with President Trump, with the Republican Party, and bearing in mind that when we talk about President Trump, we talk about somebody who has been elected as President of the United States by a very substantial majority. We don't want to be quarreling with this majority of Americans. Hence the need for us to engage seriously about these things with President Trump and the Republican Party to identify, isolate whatever the problems are. It's very, very easy to explain. It would be very simple to explain to them about this fake story about the persecution of Afrikaners and so on, entirely fake. I think it would be very easy to get rid of that particular story, to show that it's not true. So that we can then get to the more substantive matter. There must be something more substantive which results in this kind of friction. Our moderator pointed to a number of ambassadors who are in the room here, who might talk about being an ambassador more authoritatively than I can. As I'm sure all of us know, this is a very important post, a very important position. An ambassador is a representative of the head of state to another head of state. That's what an ambassador does. They are so important, these people, that sometimes they carry the title extraordinary and plenipotentiary. So you can see that Ambassador Ndlozi, extraordinary and plenipotentiary. That expression means, here is Ambassador Ndlozi, appointed as our representative in Zimbabwe, as the ambassador to Zimbabwe. As he interacts with the president of Zimbabwe, an issue arises of importance in terms of the relations between the two countries, which requires a policy decision. And the policy isn't there. But the matter of ensuring that we have got these good relations is critically important. Because this ambassador is extraordinary and plenipotentiary, they are allowed actually to take what is a policy position, to commit a whole country to a policy which is created by this ambassador in order to sort out the relations between these two countries. I'm talking about the importance of the post of ambassador. Part of the process of the appointment of an ambassador is President Mbeki says Mbuyiseni Ndlozi should go to Zimbabwe as our ambassador. That's a request to the President of Zimbabwe to say to the President of Zimbabwe, I propose to send to you Mbuyiseni Ndlozi. Will you accept him? And the President of Zimbabwe is perfectly entitled to say no. And the reason for that might very well be because the Zimbabwe embassy here in Pretoria, when they are asked by Harare, who is this Ndlozi? They report he's a thief. As a consequence of which the ambassador in Zimbabwe, the president in Zimbabwe, will say, no, but how do I talk to a thief? So the appointment is rejected. I'm talking about the importance of this. The ambassador that gets posted is by agreement with the host country. With the host country having made their own assessment that this person of such caliber and quality, that indeed this is a person that the head of state can engage. Because you are an envoy to the head of state. Now, you can therefore understand that as such an envoy, you can't go around expressing negative opinions about your host. The diplomatic dean here of our diplomatic corps is here. He knows this very well. You can't, you get Ambassador Ndlozi, who's an ambassador to South Africa. I'm president. You can't make speeches to say, that one doesn't wash. He's smelly. You can't do that. It may be correct. But he can't say that. Because it means from then onwards, there is no way I can talk to him. He ceases to be an ambassador that is respected by this host. So I'm saying that the post of ambassador has got particular restrictions. There's even conventions, the Vienna Convention, which govern the behavior of diplomats. Ibrahim Rasool is an old friend and comrade of mine. But I think in this instance he made a mistake. He said things about his host president, which he should not have said. When I saw this and I saw this persona non grata, I wasn't surprised. Because it means practically you make an assessment of your host president, which is negative. And you want to sit with that president tomorrow. They won't agree. This is your view of me. Now you want to come and sit and talk serious matters with me? No. I was very glad when he landed in Cape Town, Ibrahim, when he's talking to people, that he was insisting that whatever might have happened in his case, it was critically important that South Africa must understand that it needs good relations with the United States. It was correct. So his proficiency as a diplomat, and fortunately our school here, run by Department of International Relations, prepares these appointees. For months you sit there and you get prepared how to be a good diplomat. So that even if you are a political appointee, that particular process of proficiency is a matter that is dealt with. It ought not, this particular incident, it should not serve as an obstacle to any process that we need towards restoring good relations with the United States. I think I'm quite sure that Ibrahim Rasool himself would recognize this, that as a diplomat, you don't represent yourself. You can't say this is my personal opinion. I'm speaking in my private capacity. There's no private capacity. Agenda 2063, you know that it's being implemented in terms of decades. The first decade of Agenda 2063 was 2014 to 2023. That's been done. There's a report that has been prepared as to whether it has achieved the targets that it has set at the beginning of that decade. It's a continental program. That particular report, as far as I can tell, doesn't actually go into detail to say the member states of the African Union contributed to these outcomes of 23 in the following ways. It doesn't. Maybe it can't be done like that. But I think we must bear in mind, in this context, the various elements that impact on this issue of the African economic development. One of them is this approach that the regional economic communities are important building blocks in terms of what we need to do with regard to African integration, African unity, and all of that. So I think that would be my starting point, to say with regard to Agenda 2063, during this first decade, what is it that our region contributed to the success of that first decade? Within which you can then ask the question, what did South Africa specifically do in that context? Unfortunately, part of what has happened in our country for some years now is that over a number of years, we have dismantled our Africa policy. The focus that historically, that as a democratic South Africa, the focus that we had on the African continent receded over the years. Yeah. And therefore, I think that as part of addressing this question, what did we do with regard to Agenda 2063, we must look at this question, how do we come back to have a real, genuine policy, an Africa policy, which drives our activities? We must go back to that. It relates to a larger question. Perhaps it relates to a question that was raised by Katlego with regard to the peace and security matter. Have we as Africans, as the African Union, assessed our own shortcomings with regard to that? I'm saying this question I was raising now about our contribution to 2063 and the role and Africa policy. I think you can see this, that part of what has happened, for whatever reason, the quality of political leadership on the continent has declined. And that has included a reduction in the intensity of this feeling of a Pan-African feeling. And you see its impact practically. For instance, if you take the decisions taken by the UN Security Council in 2011 about Libya, the African Union had taken certain positions about how to handle Libya, including no military interventions, and sent the resolution to the Security Council. A week later, Security Council went directly against that AU position. And as you know what happened there, NATO invaded, Gaddafi was killed, the Libyan state was destroyed. Directly contrary to what the African leadership had said. To this day, the problems of Libya are still unresolved. Africa appoints a special envoy to join these others in trying to sort out the problems in Libya. I'm talking about a specific person whose name I shall not mention, who actually abandoned that job. He walked away. And the reason he walked away was because you have all of these people who are active, from the United Nations, from the Arab League, and they would hold meetings without him. He was just an addendum there that is forgotten. Yeah. So in the end, he left. He abandoned that job. Yeah. But it was a statement about, I'm saying that where you have a situation where an African, a very, very important African view is ignored about an African country. And the rest of the world acts about this African country without regard to whatever these Africans are saying. It tells you something about what has happened in terms of the standing of the African continent internationally and the standing of its leadership. I think there has been a movement backwards with regard to that. It's also reflected here in this country, among ourselves. So now I'm talking about a movement backwards away from Pan-Africanism, that engagement in the continent. I'm talking also about ourselves. It's something that we need to address, which would help us in terms of measuring what kind of impact do we have as a country with regard to programs like Agenda 2063. I am not aware of any particular engagement in terms of the African Union to deal with its shortcomings with regard to issues of peace and security. That kind of assessment, I don't know if it has been. Maybe it has. But it's again very visible. You have a war that breaks out in Ethiopia between the central government, federal government, Addis Ababa, against one of the states, Tigray. 2020, Tomran. Anyway, breaks out. I happen to chair the African Union Subcommittee on the Horn of Africa. So we then decided as that committee to talk to the African Peace and Security Council, to say to them, as this panel on the Horn of Africa, we can't move forward until this conflict among the Ethiopians is resolved. So please, PSC, Peace and Security Council, do your job as mandated by the Constitutive Act of the African Union, the African Peace and Security Architecture. Do what you have to do to solve this thing and then as a panel on the Horn, will be able to do our work. The then current chair of the Peace and Security Council replied to me after he had finished his term as the chair. And he says to me, "Thank you very much for your report. And then the important question that you raise. Please raise that question with my successor." And the reality of the matter is that the African Union Peace and Security Council would not discharge its responsibilities with regard to working to end that conflict in Ethiopia. They walked away from it. Until very late in a particular way, when President Obasanjo was appointed as the envoy of the chair of the commission, not even a chair of the PSC, as the chair of the commission, the envoy of the commission, of the chair of the commission. But I'm saying effectively the Peace and Security Council had walked away from its responsibilities to deal with the conflict in Ethiopia. You have the conflict currently taking place in Sudan. There is a subcommittee of the African Union which was appointed to deal with the Sudanese issue. It's led by a very good African, very good person. But the Sudanese are not listening. So there is actually no engagement of the African Union with the conflict in Sudan. Or you have the situation in the Sahel, where now you have this alliance of Sahel states, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, that have broken away from ECOWAS because of the way the ECOWAS responded after there was a coup in Niger. They've walked out. That regional economic community, ECOWAS, of course, is weaker by that fact. It's a matter of concern, must be a matter of concern to the African Union. But it's nowhere to be seen. Or you get the conflict in Somalia. The latest report I received about that, I have no way of verifying it, but I believe the reporters. They say Al-Shabaab, instead of getting weakened, is actually getting stronger. Coming very close to Mogadishu. The African Union, in my view, ought to be sitting and saying, an intervention force was established and it's been there, so Uganda and all that. What's happening? This suggests to me that we've got to come back to the point of saying there has to be a political solution with regard to the conflict in Somalia, not a military one. I don't know where the AU is with regard to that. Or take the matter of this conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I think I've said this before in one of our meetings here. That conflict in the DRC is a domestic Congolese conflict. There's a view that is taken hold among some people that is a conflict which have impacts on the sovereignty of the Congo. And therefore there's some outside force. When you talk about peace in the DRC, about ending this intervention by some outside force, no. The conflict in the Congo is fundamentally a conflict among the Congolese people. And derives from the fact that there's a section of the population of the Congo in the eastern Congo which the government in Kinshasa does not want to recognize as Congolese. This is the Rwanda-speaking population. During Mobutu's years, Mobutu said, these are not Congolese, drive them back to Rwanda. You even had a militia formed in the Eastern Congo, one they called, for instance, Mai Mai. Those years. Not Mai Mai in Kombot, but Mai Mai. With a specific task to drive out these Congolese-speaking Rwandans, these Rwandan-speaking Congolese, to drive them out into the Congo, into Rwanda. And that's why the M23 gets formed. Because the Rwandan-speaking Congolese say the government is not protecting us, we must protect ourselves. I don't know where the particular conflict is going to end, but again, what I hear from the Congolese is that in reality, today, 70% of the population of the Congo supports the M23. Because they are saying the country as a whole, for some reason, has developed a hostile attitude towards the government in Kinshasa. So what we might very well see is this rebellion among the Congolese against their own government. Again, I'm trying to answer the question, where was the AU? I don't know where it was. So there are those shortcomings. And I hope that with the election now of a new commission of the Peace and Security Council, which was done a few days ago, that indeed the reconstitution of the Commission of the African Union would create the possibility to have a relook at these matters, to have the assessment that you are talking about, to identify the shortcomings and decide what is to be done. I agree with you that in terms of the G20 and our chairing of the G20, it would be important to put on the agenda of the G20 the matter of this, the debt trap to which you referred. Because indeed it is a serious problem. Okay. It is a serious problem that needs to be addressed, including this matter about the reform of the financial architecture. That's an important issue of the World Bank, of the Bretton Woods institutions. That's an important matter. It needs to be put on the agenda of the G20, in addition to the debt trap issue, so that indeed, if a common position can be elaborated coming out of the G20 with regard to that financial architecture, it would be important. And I would add to that an important matter for us as Africans, in addition to the issue of the financial architecture, which is the issue of the loss of huge volumes of resources through illicit financial outflows. That is an important matter that needs to be addressed by the G20. Because when these resources flow out of the continent as illicit outflows, they end up somewhere. And in many instances, they end up being hosted by some of the countries who are part of the G20. So to take a G20 common position to say, what do we do to combat this very negative phenomenon of these illicit financial flows, which impact very badly on the developing countries, not only Africa, which must include the issue of the elimination of the tax havens. If the G20 can take a common position on those issues and act on them, it would help. Because, for instance, if you take us on the African continent here, the continent loses something in the order of $90 billion a year through illicit financial flows. And we need money to invest in infrastructure, to build schools, to do clinics, and all of that. But 90 billion every year goes out of the country, out of the continent, as illicit outflows. So I'm saying that if the G20 can take a common position on this, so that there is action, it would help enormously on our continent in terms of in addition to that, those issues of the financial architecture. So, Program Director, I think I've answered all the questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir. I want to thank our panel for introducing the themes that, that the President spoke about. And I think we can give them a nice round of applause. I'm going to ask them to exit the stage, but not leave us, because we want to have tea with you afterwards and a photo opportunity. Because what I now want to do is invite the audience. This is your turn to talk. And I want to arrange it like this. It's quite a big hall. I want to prioritize our UNISA students first. I want to give you the opportunity to raise your hand and ask a question or make a comment or a statement. Tell us who you are, what you study or have studied, and put a statement or a question, but you have to keep it short and sharp, because I think there are several of us who want to do the same. In another round, we are going to come to guests and friends who are also in the audience. I don't know, Vice Chancellor, if we are online, if there are people who want to ask those questions, but the technicians can maybe support us by giving us the messages. We're streaming live. Okay, all right. We'll play it by ear. And I want to ask, let me also be provocative, our ambassadors who are sitting here in front of us, plus the Dean. Yes, Welile, Ambassador, we want to hear from you as well. You have wisdom and you have very deep experience of what the President has been talking about. We want to hear your voice. You are now at the educational institution where we want to learn from you. So feel free to make a comment, add to the depth of the conversation. So let me start at the far end, the block over there. I can see a hand of a woman in black and white. You are number 1. That block is done. I'm coming to this block G here. I see no hands. Oh, okay, if you want to ask a question, just stand up in that block. Yes, you are number 2, sir. You're number 2. Stand. In white, number 3, and in blue, number 4. Did I miss somebody? She's number 5, and you are number 6. I might have to come back again. So we've got 6 already. I'll take one more block. This block here called F. Now, you can't all stand up now. So right at the end, in light gray, where are we now? Number 8. Is it number 8? No, your hand can't be up. number 8. In the white T-shirt, number 9. In the orange top, number 10. I'm going to stop there. Okay, then with the Palestinian scarf, number 11. I stop there. So remember your number. I'm going to ask our assistant, with the microphones. There we go. You're going to go from one number to the next. Let's not waste any time. Tell us who you are, what you've studied or busy studying, and put your question, please.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Masejo Solomons, and I am a BCom law student. And unfortunately, I didn't study I'm not studying at UNISA, but I am planning to.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, you're welcome.
Yes. My question, Mr. President, truly, I think, let me just speak from the heart. I am a 23-year-old who's burdened by my own potential. I am looking to further my education, but also just be a portal and an agent of change. I think truly, I am struggling to find the spaces in which we can, I myself can be, I can engage in such rigorous work, in such thought-provoking intellectual leadership work. And truly, I cannot sit and rot away with my potential. My question truly is, sir, where are the spaces for people who are like me? I sit with so much potential, so much intellectual capacity that truly I cannot rot away.
Okay.
Thank you.
You will come and register here. Number 2.
Okay, thank you. My name is Dr. Ibrahim Ekamba Stephen, and I'm from DRC. And my question is regarding the conflict in the Eastern DRC. I was born in the Eastern DRC, and I did all my studies in South Africa, BA and honors here at UNISA, and my PhD and master's at University of Pretoria. Now, my question, this is the second time I hear the president saying the conflict in the Eastern DRC is more of a Congolese conflict. I just want to ask a question and also make a comment. The comment number 1 is that the report of United Nations have indicated that Rwanda is supporting non-state armed groups in the Eastern DRC. Does the president understand that aspect of that conflict? That's the first question. Question number 2, the M23...
How many questions do you have?
I only have 2.
Okay.
Thank you. The M23 claim to defend the interest of a Tutsi ethnic group in the DRC. These are Congolese or Rwanda origin in the DRC. Now, I wanted to indicate that in the DRC, we have 2 types of Congolese or Rwanda origin, both the Tutsis and the Hutus. And these Hutus, they are actually more than the Tutsis in the DRC, all of them from Rwanda. Now, when the M23 claim they are defending the interests of the Tutsis in the DRC, and that DRC has more than 450 ethnic groups. The question is, what are the rights of these Tutsi ethnic group in the DRC, and how about the rest of other ethnic groups in the DRC that are not taking arms against the government that they are claiming their rights? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Before we go to number 3, some people have phones, cell phones with cameras and flashlights. So when we sit here on the stage, it is bothering us in the eyes. So please put it off. We've tried before. We don't want to throw you out. We'll ask our Congolese colleague to throw you out. The other thing I want to say is I appreciate long statements or political analysis, but I think it's nice to have a variety of questions and comments. So let's try and keep it short and sharp. UNISA has platforms for engagement. It's not only today. At the TM school, and we have conferences. We will engage in future. Number 3.
Good afternoon. My name is Zianda Mhlaki. Just like the first speaker, I recently completed my master's degree in development studies, but unfortunately, not fortunately, maybe not unfortunately, from the University of Johannesburg. And my question is with regards to the conflict that is happening in the DRC. If my memory serves me correctly, in 2024, the Parliament of the EU had called for an end to the memorandum of understanding that the EU had with regards to with Rwanda with regards to its 3Ts mineral complex that they import from Rwanda, citing the fact that these minerals are largely found in the Congo and Rwanda does not have them. My question is whether or not, with the absence of the AU and its Peace and Security Council in the African continent, we're seeing this in the Sahel, in Rwanda and the Great Lakes, are we then leaving a vacuum for the EU and organizations like the EU to come in and to exploit the conflict situations that exist in the continent? Thank you.
Thank you very much. An excellent question. The number 4, I think, or number next.
Good afternoon, former President Thabo Mbeki. My name is Uzi. My surname is Koza. I'm currently a master student here in UNISA. Now, the question that I want to pose is directly directed to former President Thabo Mbeki. And the question is, as a way of healing the rift between the United States and South Africa, don't you think that for South African government to withdraw the case against Israel from the ICC, that will heal, or should I say, it's a point of departure to heal this broken relationship?
You meant the ICJ, ne? Or the ICC? ICJ, yeah. I wonder which college you are from. Number 6.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, former president. Nervous. But this is a very strange ask, but yeah, I'm gonna grow courage. Can you please be my grandfather? The reason I ask is that I would like to immense in your knowledge, especially since I'm currently doing my master's degree in veterinary science with UP, but I'm graduating this year at the side. I'm currently pursuing a research on antimicrobial use in the Gauteng dairy sector and its contribution to antimicrobial resistance. So AMR has become such a major challenge, not just in agriculture, but also in public health and food security across Africa. I'm passionate about bridging a gap between research and policies. Given your leadership in shaping African development strategies, what advice would you give to a young researcher like me, and who's more interested into fusing policies and scientific research into a real driven change? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. I think that block, is that block done? There's one more.
Good morning, Mr. President. The former president. Good evening, Mr. President. I'm so shy. I I'm Matepe Patlani, and I'm currently studying international relations. I'm doing my final year, hoping to be doing my advanced studies by the TM school. So my question to the former president would be, I would like to describe the GNU as a polygamous marriage, right? So what would he have done differently if he was president by this time? And what is his take on the level of unemployment in this country? And what does he think the solution is to the problem that we have and are facing as the youth? Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director, for acknowledging me. I'd like to greet the former President Mbeki and to observe all protocol. My name is Ben Timunya. I studied here in UNISA for a BCom. I only ended up at second year. And then I got an opportunity at the Gauteng Nurses College for a 4-year diploma. And then now I'm a private nurse. And then we recently got land through the government redistribution land here in Gauteng, and then I'm a beef producer. So I'm going to speak about the AGOA issue,
Okay.
because it's going to affect me in future. I know South Africa to be a thriving country, then short history. In the 2000s, we were very much better when you look at the rate of the rand towards the dollar. It was around 8 rand. And then later on, there was a financial crisis, the global financial crisis. And then most South African companies survived. America was like almost collapsing. And then, but now when you look at America and South Africa, we are struggling a lot more than them. And then now they are pulling these tactics and okay, it's fine. Then when you look at the AGOA and how the conditions are, we stand to lose. And then when you also look at the diplomatic conditions, there's this matter between the diplomat and the country, America. So I heard Mr. President saying that the way the diplomat handled it, he doesn't advise it because when you are a guest, you shouldn't behave like that towards your host. I agree. But now, towards that engagement, there was also a frustration from the ambassador that he's trying to reach out to the top government officials in America and they wouldn't listen to him. They were listening to AfriForum and the DA. So my question now is that, where do we draw the line between being diplomatic or looking like beggars or also voicing out and also determining our own future? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We're still with this block. Yeah, there's 1 or 2 last hands, 3 in fact. Yes, sir.
Yes, good day. My name is Neo Musi. I am a postgrad student at Wits doing finance, and I apologize for UNISA students that I'm not part of their campus. My question is on the possibility of Cape independence and Vlokstad. And I fear that the South African leaders are not cognizant of the past of colonial agendas. In the 1800s, there was a German explorer who said that he discovered the Shona people in the great Zimbabwe. And the idea of it was that they wanted to create the lost white tribe of Africa. In the whole history of colonization, it's only here in the southern tip of Africa that the colonizer wanted to indigenize themselves, and the agenda continues. Phil Craig, as we speak now, is in the United States, lobbying people to fulfill a colonial agenda. Is there a possibility of Vlokstad or Cape Independence in South Africa? And if there is, what should the South African youth do about it? Thank you.
Just before you go, just repeat your last question, your last sentence.
What should the South African youth do about the Cape Independence of Vlokstad agenda?
What should the youth do?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. What should the youth do about that? You know, VC, I must say the sound system is not working in our favor. We might want to upgrade it. I know they try hard. Yes.
Hello, everybody.
Can I've got some advice for the students who are asking questions. You just do this a little. Yeah, that's too much. A little bit up, that's it.
Hi, everybody. My name is Miladi Tobejani Maiwashe. I'm a master's in economics student at the University of Limpopo.
Which university?
Of Limpopo. Yes, it's been...
It's too far now. You must bring the mic.
Okay.
That's it. There you go.
Yes. Is this okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, my question is an economic question. I'm asking about, respectfully, inflation targeting in South Africa. Is it still the right thing at this point in time? Because we have seen the Reserve Bank leverage measures against the consumer for actions that are perpetuated by the supplier, to the point whereby now the majority of the population is under a lot of crippling debt and small businesses cannot develop. So that is my question. Secondly, my last question is that as a request from for the school, that can we please also prioritize as thought leaders measures other than interest rate targeting to combat inflation? Thanks.
What measures can you take?
Yeah, no. Good evening.
Cheese, this thing.
Oh, good evening to everybody, His Excellency. My name is Orapele Matsidiso. I am an alumni of the school. Of course, in 2019, I graduated Good Governance in Africa. But currently, I just recently graduated Masters with University of Johannesburg in Development Studies. My question are two quickly. One, His Excellency, don't you think that African Union, in order to resuscitate the Pan-Africanist agenda, needs to reconsider its decision to merge the Political Affairs Department with the Peace and Security Department? Perhaps maybe one should say, as a comment, maybe that should be demerged, and some of you as the former heads of states be advisory committee or council of that particular political affairs to resuscitate back the Pan-Africanist agenda. The last question, His Excellency, is with respect to the question that you asked last year, I think in this house, whether we had read the Nugent report on SARS. I want to pose the question in the light of what is happening with regard to the budget that has to be presented and adopted in National Parliament. Do you think the government has made efforts to implement the recommendation of the Nugent report on SARS, particularly on 4 key areas? The amendment of the SARS Act to appoint the Deputy SARS Commissioner, 2, the re-establishment of the compliance committee. 4, the establishment of the high-level integrity unit. Lastly, the appointment of independent general. Within that, do you think if, of course, the government could have implemented the recommendations of that report, we would have collected at least enough to avert the current increase of value-added tax? Thank you very much.
This should be the last question for this round. So, yes, sir.
Sorry? Yeah. Good evening, compatriots. Good evening, Your Excellency. Thank you so much for the insightful lecture. My question really is on, firstly, the issue of Zimbabwe, Your Excellency. For a long time, there's been criticism that South Africa is not handling the issue of Zim as well as it should. So what is to be done about that to resolve the issues in Zim, because they have an impact on South Africa? The second question is, I think, the missed opportunity of SADC as a regional bloc, in particular given what is happening, the geopolitics and so on, the relationship with the United States. I think it's about time that South Africa in particular, as well as neighboring countries, really begin to consolidate and create a more powerful and consolidated regional bloc for our own political and economic purposes. Thank you so much.
Let's just pause for a minute, colleagues. We've had questions around 8 or 9 different themes. We want the President to respond. We've only dealt with one half of the audience. And I'm looking at the clock, it's 5:15. I'm consulting with the acting dean who's coming to my side, whether we take another round and for how long. But I also want to say, there's a trick that you are doing. When you start to ask the question, you add another one. Some even 3. We need to keep it shorter, and I'm going to ask Prof. Edith just to guide us here.
Just do 1, 2, 3, 4 in the next session.
That's nice. She's given me a formula, which I will reveal later. President Mbeki, would you like to respond to some of these questions, some or all? I can summarize for you, but I don't think...
Yeah, I hope I heard all of them.
Yeah, if you miss the important one,
You will, okay.
I've taken the platform.
With regard to these the questions on the Congo, I have absolutely no doubt that Rwanda is very keenly interested in what's happening in the Congo for 2 reasons. One of them is the one we've been talking about, which is the presence of a Rwandan-speaking population on the Congo, in the Congo, which is a matter of the drawing of the colonial borders. The colonial masters draw a line, and some Rwandan-speaking people are on this side of that line and that side of the line. I think it would be unnatural for Rwanda not to be interested in what's happening to the Rwandan-speaking people across the border. Secondly, as we all know, some of the people who committed genocide in Rwanda in 1994 ran into the Eastern Congo, where they still are to this day. The FDLR, who say that one of their tasks is to overthrow the government of Rwanda. That's the second reason that Rwanda would be interested in the Congo. So I have absolutely no doubt that the Rwanda is very interested in what's happening in the Eastern Congo. What they do practically in terms of interventions and so on, I don't know. Except in instances where the government in Kinshasa has actually authorized that the Rwandan army can come in to deal with the FDLR. I haven't heard of any other ethnic group in the Congo which has suffered the same fate as the Tutsi population in the Eastern Congo. One of the colleagues was saying, what about the other ethnic groups? I haven't heard. I'm not Congolese. Maybe the Congolese would know better than I do. Of any other ethnic group that has suffered the same fate, as a consequence of which it takes a decision that it must protect itself. The EU, the question we mentioned about the EU and what the EU does towards Rwanda, I'm sure is correct. I've heard of other countries taking what particular posture towards Rwanda. The basic question I'm raising is that you will not solve the problem, the conflict of the Congo, unless you deal fundamentally with this domestic issue. When the Congolese met here and sat in Sun City and negotiated the Sun City Agreement, this was part of the discussion. The Congolese colleagues will remember that one of the formations that participated in the Sun City dialogue was an armed organization called the RCD. The RCD, sometimes people call it the Goma RCD. The RCD essentially represented that Banyamulenge population, accepted in these negotiations as part of the Congo. He participated in negotiations, and some of the decisions taken in the inter-Congolese dialogue were about the proper integration of that Banyamulenge population in the army, in government, and so on. You would find as a resolution out of the inter-Congolese dialogue, which deals with the issue of national minorities. The formal resolution at Sun City, the reason that resolution was adopted was to deal with this question. So I'm saying the Congolese, when they met together, they recognized this problem exactly for what it is and dealt with it. And I'm quite sure that was also reflected in the constitution that was then decided upon based on the Sun City outcomes. Essentially, if we're genuinely interested in, well, let me just finish that story. After the Sun City negotiations concluded, and the Congolese took a particular position, the positions I'm explaining, this is how we are going to deal with ourselves as Congolese about our country. As I say, it reflected in the Constitution. We then thought it was also necessary to deal with this issue of the relationship between the DRC and Rwanda. So we hosted negotiations here in this city between President Joseph Kabila and President Paul Kagame. And we're saying to them, The Congolese have taken a particular position about how to sort out their own problems. You need to contribute to that as countries which neighbor each other. So they signed an agreement. And one of those agreements, the issues decided in that agreement was the government of the Congo would act to disarm the FDLR. Another part of that was Rwanda would withdraw its troops from the DRC. I'm sure you'd find that agreement on the internet, signed by the two presidents, because in our view, it was important both to solve this problem of the conflict among the Congolese by the Congolese, but it was also important that the neighborhood contributes to that solution. And that was why that agreement was signed. It didn't work. And the reason it didn't work was because in reality, the DRC government did not have the capacity to disarm the FDLR. So if you are on the Rwandan side of the borderline, you would say, but the FDLR problem has not been solved in terms of the signed agreement. Those are some of the realities here. We can go into more of these realities about that situation, but fundamentally, to resolve the conflict in the Congo, we've got to go back to the Congolese and say, what did you agree at Sun City? What did you put in your constitution as a result? What have you done about the things about which you agreed? I think that's what would help us to solve this problem. The matter of historically, the ANC has a relationship with the Palestinians, particularly through the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization. Both these organizations were allies because they were confronted, they were both engaged in a struggle for national liberation. With the Palestinians involved in a struggle recognizes it's in the United Nations decisions. The very first decision of the United Nations General Assembly in 1947, dealing with the creation of the two states, Jewish state, Palestinian state. This Palestinian state has not existed since then, to this day. The vision adopted by the United Nations I'm saying in 1947, when they took this decision to form the State of Israel, this idea of the formation of a Palestinian state is there. It's never happened. And indeed, the conditions, now, my view, the conditions for the establishment of this Palestinian state in Gaza and the West Bank and so on, those conditions have become eroded by the behavior of the Israeli government. The settlements on the West Bank, for instance, have taken away a lot of the land which had been part of that Palestinian state. I'm saying, therefore, that it was not a surprise that the South African government would take a position in defense of the Palestinians and criticize whatever the government of Israel was doing. Some years back, when I was still in government, we hosted a bilateral meeting between the Israelis and the Palestinians in a wine estate somewhere in the Western Cape. We sat with them for days to say, as representatives of these two communities, let's find a solution. And when there were military questions they were asking, we called in our National Defense Force to say, please help. If there were police matters, we'd call in the police service to say, please help. Because we were trying very hard to get these two to agree on how to settle this problem. So our intervention on this matter, it doesn't start with the case in the International Court of Justice. We've had prime ministers of Israel Ehud Barak, before he became prime minister, came here. We discussed with him. The president, the prime minister of Israel was assassinated, Yitzhak Shamir. We were in contact with him. After the decision taken in Oslo, which led to the birth of the Palestinian Authority, was in touch with us to say this is what they've agreed. And he personally was very committed to make sure that these things happens, because we have to solve this problem of the relations between the Israelis, the Jewish population, and the Palestinians. And therefore, the matter of the Palestinian state was very important, which is why he was assassinated. We're engaged with them. I'm saying that we are not new to this question. And consistently, what we have sought is to encourage an agreement between these two sides, so that indeed what was visualized in the 1947 resolution of the General Assembly is accomplished. And therefore, it's I don't think our attitude with regard to the matter of a just resolution of the conflict, which must address the fundamental interest of the Palestinian people, in the same way that the protection of the Israel and so on is also very important, our positions on those things won't change. So in practical sense, even if South Africa decided that they're withdrawing their intervention in the ICJ, that won't end the case. That case is already with the International Court of Justice, and the Court of Justice will proceed with what it has to do. But fundamentally, I'm saying that, the positions we've taken over many years on the Palestinian question, the same positions as when President Clinton was there, President Bush was there, Bush Senior, Bush Junior, President Trump when he was in the first term, the same positions. And I'm sure that we are not going to change those positions. And indeed, I think everybody, all of us need to join hands to say the rights of the Palestinian people must be respected. I really don't know what anybody expects South Africa to do with regard to Zimbabwe. After the elections in Zimbabwe, I can't remember now the exact year, but there were elections, presidential elections, when you had something like 22 or 23 presidential candidates. What year was that? And then you have these elections, and President Mnangagwa is elected president of Zimbabwe. He then called on all of the parties which had presented presidential candidates to come together to form some kind of political collective to discuss the future of Zimbabwe. And indeed, that formation emerged. The weakness with it was that some of the parties that had candidates did not participate. One of the results of that particular presidential election was that there were two of the candidates who, between the two of them, got 95% of the votes. It's the President Emerson Mnangagwa and Nelson Chamisa. Between the two of them, they had 95% of the presidential vote. The other 21 parties shared the other 5%. So this formation that President Mnangagwa called for, parties that had the candidates must come together. Chamisa's party did not participate, plus 1 or 2 or 3, 4 others. So now one of the demands that is being put forward by Zimbabwe, correctly, is the lifting of sanctions that have been imposed on Zimbabwe to create better space for the Zimbabweans to address their own development challenges. Particularly in sanctions imposed by the United States. So, I know many of the players, political players in Zimbabwe. So I went to see President Mnangagwa to say to him, President, I agree. We need these sanctions lifted. But part of what needs to happen, is that you Zimbabweans need to speak with one voice. Our colleague also raised this question about the need for Africa to make sure that it works as a bloc, to say that you as Zimbabweans need to speak with one voice on this matter, apart from any other consideration. And therefore, it seemed to me that one of the things that needs to happen is that these two parties, which had 95% of the presidential votes, need to get together to talk about the future of Zimbabwe. So that even on this matter, when we approach the rest of the world to say lift sanctions, it must be said by both. Agreed, we agreed. Just get together and sort out these problems. And to cut a long story short, that meeting never took place. I don't know if it's still relevant now, that kind of approach. But we were intervening as South Africans, as good neighbors, to say from our reading of the situation in Zimbabwe, this is what we thought we should do. I'm saying it did not produce any results. I don't know now what would be expected of South Africa with regard to Zimbabwe. I'm quite certain that the Zimbabweans themselves are very much aware of the fact that they need to get together as Zimbabweans to discuss whatever it is that constitute the fundamental problems facing the country. And I think indeed that the Zimbabweans must be given space to do that themselves. I don't know specifically, the question that is raised very specifically, whether our government or the GNU has done the things that were recommended by the GNU, by the New Joint Commission on the South African Revenue Service. I really honestly don't know whether any of those things have been done. But the point I want to make with regard to that is the larger question I was raising about the Nugent Commission report is this. That commission makes a very critically important statement about South Africa. And that statement is that there's a group of people in our country who are very, very determined to make sure that the democratic experiment fails. And they intervened in this matter of SARS to make sure that you cut down the revenues that are available to the state so that it can pay civil servants, it can pay the army, it can pay the... It would collapse. And that's what Nugent demonstrates practically, what was done. And indeed, the reason the Nugent Commission was appointed was exactly because the revenues accruing to the states were diminishing because of the success of that intervention. That's what rang the alarm bells. This South African Revenue Service, which is so efficient in the past, all of a sudden, very inefficient. Smaller and smaller revenues accruing to the state because of a conscious intervention to destroy the South African Revenue Service. I'm saying that the Nugent Commission report points to this reality of the intervention of the counter-revolution in this country to destroy the democratic experiment. And there are other interventions that it made. With it, part of the reason we've got this economic crisis and so on. The reason, for instance, you have the failure of the state corporations. This story that is told is because of deployment of comrades to positions because they have no qualifications, but they are cadres. It's wrong. The destruction of the state corporations was a systematic process done by exactly the same people who intervened in SARS, as Nugent explains. And that problem persists. And part of what concerns me is that it seems to me many of our people are not listening. For instance, last year, we said, given the problems our country faces, we need a national dialogue. Meaning a national dialogue that let the people of South Africa come together and say, this is the South Africa we want, this is the South Africa we don't want. Without mediation of political parties or anything. Let the people themselves talk and determine their own destiny. I thought the matter was agreed. I think it's even in the documents of the GNU, we agree. But nothing is moving. Why? Because there are people who don't want that national dialogue to take place. It's because they've got their own agenda for South Africa, which is very, very different from the agenda that would come from the people of South Africa speaking for themselves. So today, many people ask, but President, you called for this thing months ago. And it was agreed. Why is nothing moving? I'm saying nothing is moving because, my view, there are other people who don't want it to happen. And I'm hoping that this matter will get sorted out. The lessons from the Nugent Commission indeed are about the specific amendments to changes to the SARS Act and all that, that is mentioned. But more fundamental is that we must confront this reality that there were people in this country who don't want this democracy to succeed. And they intervened in very specific ways, like spelled out in the SARS Nugent Commission, in order to make sure this democracy fails. And I'm hoping that what was visualized as a national dialogue does not fall victim to that kind of negative intervention. Indeed, I must say that when I've at some point spoken about some of the issues raised by some of our Afrikaner compatriots when they talk about alienation in the society, I've said the best place to discuss those matters is in the national dialogue. Instead of people going to Washington to say you are being whatever, they must come to the national dialogue and make that presentation. And so that we, as all of us as South Africans, we can then discuss that. If you say, my cultural rights as an African are being denied, say it in the national dialogue and produces evidence so that all of us as South Africans can then say, well, what is to be done? Because the answer to the question, what is to be done, will not come from Washington. It must come from here. So during the negotiations, we addressed, as the colleague would know, in a very, very detailed manner, this demand for a folk start. It was addressed in a very comprehensive manner. It includes, for instance, with regard to the elections in 1994, based on the 1993 Constitution. There's an agreement that part of the results of those elections would be used in order to assess whether objectively conditions exist for the establishment of a folk state. It's a specific agreement. Elections took place, and everybody agreed, including the Afrikaners, that the election results, the voice of the people of South Africa, black and white, said there's no place for a folk state. There was no way you could. There was no way you could say this particular area is a folk state. So I'm saying the matter was raised, was discussed. The demand for Afrikaner self-determination, which was very much part of those negotiations. That matter was discussed, was negotiated, as a result of which there's actually a constitutional provision which provides for self-determination for all of the people of South Africa, not just Afrikaners. So the matter was addressed. That's what I'm saying, that if there is anybody among the Afrikaner community who still thinks there's a problem, the place to discuss us is in national dialogue. The danger with the position that is being taken, as reflected in what seems to have been said in the United States, is that you create a situation where the suggestion is the country must not undertake this task of the eradication of the legacy of colonialism and apartheid. Because if you do that, you threaten Afrikaner interests. You can't say we must not act to change the country away from that past in order to preserve what are said to be rights of the Afrikaners. You can't say that. I'm saying the danger of it is that if you take this particular group of white South Africans and they set themselves aside, they've got particular interests which must block change in South Africa. You are creating conditions of mutual hostility. The black oppressed will say, you want us to continue to live with this heritage of apartheid and colonialism, and you maintain whatever advantage you had as a result of that system. That's unsustainable. It's very, very dangerous to create a situation where there might be conflict of that kind. And yet I'm saying that the place is there for these problems to be addressed by South Africans as a whole. A national dialogue must include the possibility for these Afrikaners, like anybody else, to come and present their own case. And let us as South Africans together discuss those. The GNU is our government. Whatever we think of it, it's a government. And as the government, it must help to solve the problems that are facing the country. We've got huge levels of unemployment. We've got huge levels of poverty, a very stark situation of racial inequalities, gender inequalities. Those are real problems. And this only government we have, the GNU, must address those issues. Whether it can, I don't know. But it's got an obligation. If it says we are the government of South Africa, what's the government of South Africa do? Government of South Africa must address those issues. The issue of combating inflation, clearly the colleague is correct. It can't just be a matter of the Reserve Bank moving interest rates up and down. It fundamentally is a question that we were raising earlier when the matter about VAT and fiscal matters was raised. We've got to attend to this problem, that effectively the South African economy is stagnant. Whether it's growing annually at 0.8 or something, effectively stagnant. What that means, proportionately, is that our people are getting poorer every day. Critically, the matter of the regeneration of the South African economy becomes important. And this happened in the past. The statisticians, for instance, will say at some point, maybe 2004, 2005, 2006, thereabouts, this economy was growing at the rate of about 5% a year. It was under an ANC government. So the argument that we are incapable of managing a modern economy is nonsense. The things that must be done, the things that must be done about the economy must be done. I was saying earlier, we can't avoid the notion, the implementation of the concept of a social compact. That is part of what needs to be done in order to address the issue of inflation. I should have acknowledged also Our Lady, the beekeeper. Maybe that's one of the ways of addressing inflation, is to produce honey. In terms of our diplomacy, no, sure, we can't be beggars. South Africa cannot behave as a beggar under any circumstance. We've got to engage whoever we have to engage, but not in the sense of coming to beg anybody. We have a population here which is not used to begging. This population which fought to defeat the apartheid regime, it did not beg. People are ready to sacrifice their lives and sacrifice their lives in order to bring about change. So if you had a government that went to this population to say, we've got to beg somebody else for something, they would never understand what you are talking about. So the question that's raised by two of our colleagues, how does one become an agent for change? I've got this particular specialization. I'm very interested in matters about food security. I'm an accountant. I've got that particular skill, but I should not just earn a salary. But this skill must help to change the government, change the country for the better. What do I need to do in order to intervene to change this country for the better? In food security, accountancy, whatever. I would say to, fortunately, in the hall we have the chairperson of council of UNISA and the vice chancellor and principal. For the students of UNISA, they must pose those questions to those two. We've got the skills. We want to make a positive impact on the transformation of our society. How do we do that? That's a question. And I'm sure the university would help to answer that question. To see how its own students, its own graduates, they intervene to change this country for the better. I think that's a matter that also needs to be addressed by our political parties. So I can only speak not on behalf, but as a member of one of the political parties. In our case, I think we're so preoccupied with what to do with ourselves that I doubt if we would have time to address that question. But it's a question that must be addressed even by the political parties. What is it that they suggest should be done by these South Africans who are very ready to act as agents of change? So I'm not answering that question myself, because I think there are other people who are better empowered to do that. Anthony, that's all the questions.
Colleagues, I want to take the temperature of the room. I want to understand if there's any last burning question that has not been raised before. I'm going to take two hands. That lady there in the black and white, if you can stand up. That's number one. Number two, right here. Right here.
Oh, okay.
Stand up. Right, yes, you're number two. Remember, the President also suggested that the Vice Chancellor might want to say something. And I gave an opportunity to our ambassadors to make an input, a small input. I know, Ambassador Welile, you tend to make speeches. No, you want to make a short input for us. You are number 3, and then we're finished. Yes, because of the time, colleagues. Can we have number 1, please?
Okay, number 1 you can like it.
Yes, please.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Thabo. I am a BCom Law graduate from the University of South Africa, proudly, and I work for a law firm. I've worked for more than 3 law firms. So my question is based on debt and finances. We graduate, we get jobs, and we want to be the change that we see from our ministers and our president. So my question is, what attitude and actions about money can we as graduates, trying our best to generate wealth, adopt?
Can you repeat that question for the benefit of the president?
Okay. What attitude and actions about money can we as graduates, trying our best to build generational wealth, adopt? The reason I'm asking this question is we recently started a property stockful, and we are seeing that as much as we are trying, we might have the wrong attitudes or actions towards personal finance.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a nice question. Number 2.
Thank you, Program Director. Okay. Good evening.
Yeah,
it is? Yes. My name is Kemi Matato, and I am the founder of SQR Audit. It's an audit firm based here in Pretoria. For quotations or requests for proposals, you can visit our site on www.sqrbusiness.co.za. Okay. So the question to my president is on the state capture, and because we are still under state capture, my president, and the audit failures that are continuous. There's no improvement in Parliament. What structural changes would you recommend, my president, to ensure that our audit reports from the AG have tangible consequences that are managed for non-compliance by our political leaders? Following up on that, what lessons can we within the public sector, because, well, I'm a business, but I specialize with the public sector. What can we learn from the private sector auditing practices? And I'm coming in with this from the recent Steinhoff saga. Where is Marcus Euste? Is he coming back? Thank you.
I thought he was passed on. Okay.
Thank you.
Ambassador Willile Nhlapo, the word is yours. Thank you. Yeah, you make the speech on Monday. Ntabi saying? We're getting you another one.
No, thank you very much. No, I was consulting with my colleagues there, former ambassadors. After listening attentively to what the president was saying and answering questions, we are prepared to avail ourselves to any students who want to do their honors or doctorates on the subjects that the questions have been asked. No, because we were there on the ground. We were there on the ground and we were ready to do it. Because the reports that we had written at the time, they've now been declassified, some of them. The challenge we are faced with is that researchers from the US and everywhere else, they come across those reports
Yes,
They want us to confirm and elaborate.
yes.
And this is criminal because this is South African intellectual property. So you invested in us, use us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ambassador. You're speaking to my heart. President Mbeki, there were only 2 issues really, or 3 that came up. Would you like to tackle them now? And because we can then conclude with this part of the program. Yeah. The lady is saying, if I run a stokvel, do I have the attitude, the approach, the belief system, the understanding to actually make a difference? And the lady, towards wealth creation. Do we have that DNA in us to do that? And the lady here is saying, what has happened to the forensic audit and the consequences of state capture? In short.
Yeah, I was going to say with regard to lessons, for instance, about the failure of Steinhoff and all of that. Those sorts of lessons. The other report I would recommend with regard to that is a very, very good report that was done. The Commission of Inquiry was actually appointed by the apartheid regime. We inherited it. I think the issue was called the master bond, whatever. It had to do with a crooked scheme with some Afrikaner business people, very crooked, robbed the public of a lot of money. And that particular report, very important in terms of its assessment of the auditing profession, because it explained in detail how the accountants and the auditors had facilitated that process of theft. So that even if the actuality of the finances of a particular company are going like this, the accountants write the opposite. They say the finances are going the opposite direction. I think that's one of the big lessons. I think that's one of the big lessons that we need to learn, because I think the master bond, that is a commission makes a recommendation like that. Quite what was done by the government as a consequence of that, I can't remember. But it would be the same with all of these other things. The issue of state capture, for instance, there are the detailed matters that would be addressed. What happened in terms of ESCOM, what happens in terms of Transnet, and so on, the specific instances. But I think the fundamental question is, you have the state capture, in this instance, constituted in the possibility for a company actually to take control of an important sector of the state so that it could abuse the state for its own private purposes. The question is, how do we avoid that? It's entirely a political question. It's entirely a question of the quality of our politics. If you have anybody who sits in senior positions like government, and allows himself, herself, to be captured by the private sector, to be then used by the private sector for public benefit, there's something fundamentally wrong with the politics of that person. It's somebody we should never have elected. But I'm saying fundamentally that issue of state capture, it addresses that issue. It's a political issue, and I think it's related to what I was raising earlier about forces opposed to the success of the democratic experiment. If you take in this instance of that state capture, the Gupta brothers, when I'm sitting at home alone, I'm saying to myself, there is something improbable about this story. To have these three brothers come out of India, they are here in this country for a few days, well, not days, a few years. But during these few years, these new arrivals are so knowledgeable about South Africa that they can establish their tentacles in such a way that they actually succeed to do the damage they did. My view is they didn't act alone. There were South Africans who were working with them in partnership. You couldn't come as a foreigner like that, and suddenly you've got access even to children. Now I'm going to take this child and promote them. How do you know this child? There were people here in South Africa who were part of that scheme. Unfortunately, matter did not arise in the Zondo Commission to answer that question. What gave them the capacity to do things they did? With regard to the attitude, do we have the right attitude in terms of wealth creation? I'm sure we do. I'm sure we do. The lady, the beekeeper, demonstrates that. The other day at home, I was saying to one of my colleagues who works with us at home, I was saying to him that, can you please, it was on an afternoon, can you please go and get some fat cakes? Amakwenya. And he says to me, no, but President, you can't ask me that question now. So I say, why? He says, because it's clear you have not lived in a township for many years. Amakwenya are only available during the morning part of the day, not the afternoon. That's wealth creation. I think the instinct, our people have got the capacity to do that. And the question I think to ask is, have we created enough conditions to make this happen, including the provision of finances, affordable finances for a small business person, for instance? I think those are the questions, but I think in terms of attitude to do this, I think we have. The last person, Anthony, if you will allow me, last thing I'd like to say. We've been discussing the DRC. Important questions raised. I want to say welcome to General Mugwebi. General Mugwebi here is a retired officer of the National Defense Force, but he was the commander of the UN troops in the Congo. So if you want to know more about the Congo, that's the question to ask. Thanks a lot.
Just before I hand back to Professor Miller to conclude the proceedings, I want to say on the generous offer from the ambassadors and the general, our school will structure a mechanism. So if you're a student, you want to study and interview and ask, you must come to us. We'll make space for you. Thank you again very much. Darlene.
May I then just take this opportunity to congratulate this conversation community, because it's like a community now. People say that they come regularly to these discussions. The discussion is